further ado, let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Anita Gadhia-Smith. And she has a very impressive bio, so I would like to share it with all of you so that you know her background and understand why she speaks so passionately about her issues. Dr. Anita Gadhia-Smith is a psychotherapist in Washington, D.C., specializing in addictions, recovery, and relationship issues. Dr. Gadhia-Smith is also the author of 5 best-selling books on From Addiction to Recovery, Practical Therapy, Live and Laugh Each Day, How to Stay Together, and How to Heal Emotional Trauma. She's particularly effective, discerning, and insightful about current issues that have a psychological impact on individuals and couples. She has served as a consultant to the United States Congress in parity legislation for substance abuse treatment. She has also spoken nationally and internationally on radio, television, and other media as an expert on a variety of topical subjects. One of the things that distinguishes Dr. Anita Gadhia-Smith is her own personal history of addiction, as well as 3 decades of recovery. She has had a first-hand experience of a spiritual, physical, and emotional bottoming out, followed by a remarkable story of recovery and commitment to helping others who suffer with alcoholism, addictions, and relationship issues. Her history and training allow her to approach her work, her perspective, and her writing as a healed healer. Her story is one of redemption. She is a unique therapist who has become a successful, self-actualized woman by way of an intense struggle and personal journey in her own right. Her insights and wisdom are tremendous and inspiring about how to obtain and maintain ongoing balance in our lives. Dr. Gadhia-Smith earned her undergraduate degree from the Johns Hopkins University and graduate degrees from the Catholic University of America and Southern California University. In her practice in Washington, D.C., Dr. Gadhia-Smith works with adults and adolescents in individual, couple, and family modalities and says, therapy is a journey through which we find our authentic selves and become the best we can be. Through therapy, profound and lasting change can occur. My approach is to meet you where you are and help you to move towards your goals, overcome obstacles, and achieve maximum growth. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Gadhia-Smith is actually married to Dr. Ron Smith, who is our next speaker, who is going to talk about the addictions. And I know that you have 3 children and you have 6 grandchildren. So you're a living example of the happy relationship. And here you are. So the floor is yours, Dr. Gadhia-Smith. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Anita Gadhia-Smith. Thank you so much for including me in tonight's event, and really appreciated our first speaker, Dr. Bibu. The issue of stigma is one that I have witnessed a lot of change over the last 30 years, and not only in addiction treatment, but also mental health treatment. There was a time when I was growing up when it was a shameful thing to go to therapy, and people used to think it was for the severely mentally ill, and that regular people didn't do that because they didn't need therapy. And over time, things have changed where there are a lot of people who go to therapy who have serious mental health issues, and there are many people who also have less serious, but they don't want their issues to become more serious, and they start working on them sooner and earlier and are able to maximize potential in their lives and to live more fully. And I've had the honor of being in private practice in both Georgetown and Bethesda for well over 20 years, and have had just a great time working in mental health. It's really, really meaningful and fun. And today I was asked to talk about healthy relationships. And as was mentioned in my introduction, I am also a person in long-term recovery from addiction, recovery for 30 years. And I remember some time back, one of the things that I learned that was very powerful was that the 2 barometers of mental health are the ability to love and the ability to work. And that if you can do those 2 things, you can create a meaningful and satisfying life. And so relationships really are one of the most important things that we do in our life. If I actually believe probably the most important, and one of the most difficult things that we do, because we are all so very human, and we have emotions and feelings that come up in relationships, and it's not always easy to deal with them. So what I'm going to talk about tonight are 5 keys, and there would be other things, but I'm just going to focus on 5 keys to having healthy relationships. The first one is self-care. And I have 4 cornerstones of self-care that I recommend to my patients. And they are sleep, exercise, good nutrition, and mental health care, including social support. And these sound like very simple, basic things, but it's amazing how difficult the simplest things can be. And I think one of the gifts of the pandemic that we're in is to be able to slow down and think about what is really essential in our lives. And we're all right now not rushing around and racing with our to-do list. So we have a chance to really focus on what matters. And I, with sleep, there are a lot of reasons that people do or don't sleep. And sometimes an underlying mental health issue can be a reason for disrupted sleep, sometimes being too busy, but it's just really important to prioritize sleep because it's the linchpin to everything in your physical and mental health. It greatly impacts the hormonal systems and mood and frustration tolerance and stress and energy level. And if you had to pick one out of those 4, I would say start with sleep and work on that first. Exercise is the second, and it doesn't have to be a gym. Just walking, like the recommendations are 30 minutes a day. I myself walk 45 minutes a day, and I do 3 miles every morning, and it energizes me and lifts me up in a way that caffeine cannot do. The nutrition piece, I think, is very critical and underrated in terms of the role of nutrition and mental health. There are many mental health conditions that are greatly improved in having better nutrition. Just sugar and caffeine are 2 things that are heavily laden in the American diet that greatly contribute to anxiety, poor sleep, restlessness, irritability. Some of us can tolerate those things and some of us can't. And we have to also look at how our body responds over the course of time as we get older, because our nutritional needs change. The amount of food that we need changes over time. Most of us need less food as we get into middle age and beyond, which is where I am at 57. And so we have to keep adjusting and listening to our bodies in order to make good choices and to have optimal mood and energy and brain function. Mental health care would be the 4th component of self-care. And I really appreciate that it was discussed that the stigma has come down, because it is. It's no longer, shameful or a bad thing to seek mental health care. We've had so many people come out in the public eye and talk about it. I remember when I wrote my first book in 2007, which was 13 years ago, I came out as being in recovery and also being a therapist. And a number of colleagues approached me and said, "Are you sure you want to do that? Because, you're revealing things about you that are very personal." And I said, "Absolutely, I do, because who I am and my truth is more powerful than a lot of things that I have learned in textbooks. And I just felt that it was really important to just tell the truth. And in my case, it had been a very severe drug addiction as well as alcoholism, including cocaine and heroin. Before heroin was very common as it is today, back in the 80s, it was a much more stigmatized addiction. And even after I got into recovery, it was 5 years before I talked about some of the drugs I did, even with other people in recovery, because I had so much shame. And over time, a lot of that shame just gradually went away. And the way that shame vanishes is by telling the truth. Speaking the truth is how the stigma goes away and how we release ourselves from shame. And we get to do that in therapy and with people that we trust and spiritual advisors. The second key to healthy relationships is to do some work on your family of origin and childhood issues, especially if you have had neglect, abuse, and trauma. And I think that very few of us manage to escape childhood without some sort of difficulty and some sort of trauma emotionally. And there are different levels and different degrees of trauma. But what happens with relationships, and it could be a couple or it could even just be good friends, is that the unaddressed issues and wounds from childhood will come up and present themselves once you get into an intimate relationship. Many of you have maybe been in a relationship and it goes really well for maybe the first 6 to 9 months, and then it starts to get real and it starts to get harder, and you have a hard time handling yourself and the other person, and a lot of things come up. And so a lot of what comes up is what has been repressed, and the unhealed childhood wounds come up, and they can destroy a lot of relationships if they're not attended to, recognized, and dealt with. And that is best done with some kind of professional help or self-help groups. The third key to healthy relationships is to know what your deal breakers are. Now, there's some very common major deal breakers that many of us think of when we think about this word, like violence, abuse, or active addiction. But sometimes people have their own deal breakers that don't fall into those major categories. If you have any of those major categories going on right now in your relationship, get help right away, because these things don't get better, and left untreated, they only get worse over time. And one of the issues that comes up in relationships a lot that is most problematic is managing conflict. And it takes time to understand yourself and your own responses to conflict, your partners, and how they mesh together. So work on these things when you ask for help. Know your deal breakers, know your bottom lines, and go for something that's a good fit. You know, people are not necessarily good or bad people. Relationships are all about the fit. It's all about finding someone who your crazy can fit with their crazy, and you can make it work. Because we've all got some crazy, and we've all got some deal breakers too. The fourth key to healthy relationships is what I call taking personal responsibility. I have a lot of people come into my office either by themselves or with a partner, and they come in and talk about what the other person is doing. And without really focusing on yourself and what you're doing, it's very hard for a relationship to get healthy and stay healthy, and for a partnership to work. What what works better is when each person looks at their own part and takes responsibility for their part of the equation and then works on themselves. Rather than working on the other person, work on yourself. Take responsibility for your part of the dynamic in the relationship, and also take responsibility for your own joy and happiness. We're not with somebody for them to make us happy. We have to take responsibility for creating what we want in our life, for doing something with our life, for making something of ourselves. We cannot live through the identity of our partner, right? We're all here for a very short time, and there's nothing like COVID to remind you of that we don't know how much time we have, and it's really important to take responsibility and do whatever you can to fulfill your potential and try to leave this world a better place.
These are wonderful remarks. Yeah.
Thank you. And so part of that is creating meaning and purpose for yourself outside of just being someone's partner, but actually finding your meaning and purpose. And the fifth key to healthy relationships is to pursue ongoing personal growth. You want to have a partner who is willing and able to work on themselves. And if you do the same, if you are committed to your own personal growth, you will grow and continue to flourish over time. And in a healthy relationship, you may not always give the other person exactly what they want, but in a healthy relationship, each person will become a better version of themselves. And each person will grow because of it. And sometimes that's out of joy, sometimes that's out of pain. But if you're growing and becoming more fully actualized as a person in a relationship, then it's probably one that's good for you. So those are my 5 keys, and I'll leave you with those, and happy to take any questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Gadhia-Smith, and to our audience.
I'd like to add something.
Okay.
If there's anyone out there and there's something that you don't want to talk about, find a safe person and go tell that thing that you've been keeping a secret your whole life.
Amen.
Okay. And I want to get to as many questions as possible, so I'm going to list